Have you ever been unable to get the words out when you've got something to say? For most people, it's the kind of thing that happens to them once or twice, and often it's when they're in a state of shock. But for a young man from the New Forest, it happens every day. Daniel Bates has selective mutism. His mum, Catherine, joins me on BBC Radio Solent this afternoon. Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
How's life in the New Forest?
It's fine, yeah. It was a lovely drive through the forest this morning. It's really good.
Well, you are very welcome here this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about selective mutism. What is it?
It's sort of almost a phobia of not being able to speak, not saying the right words. Daniel actually described it when he was about 7 as having the words in his mind. He knew what he wanted to say, but they just physically felt stuck in his throat and they wouldn't come out. And he also said that his tummy was like jelly. And as I say, he wanted to say the words, he knew what he wanted to say, but there was that frustration of them just not physically coming out.
So that's how he described it when he was 7. When did it become apparent to you that this might be a problem for Daniel?
Well, it definitely started round about when he started preschool. He was very quiet, wouldn't mix, and he was obviously very shy. He was labelled as shy, and perhaps he'll come out of it. He then started reception in primary school, and things didn't seem to get any better, and in some ways it was almost worse. He couldn't answer the register. He mixed with 1 or 2 children, but not very many, and we just didn't know what the problem was. Some people thought perhaps he was trying to be manipulative. He was a bright boy, and they could see that, but nobody could understand what the problem was.
How did that feel then, as mum and dad, when somebody might think that your small child was trying to be manipulative? I mean, that's not a word you'd normally use to describe a child.
No, it was very frustrating because I knew that wasn't my child. Yeah. And in those days, this was 13 years ago, the internet was very new. There wasn't the information out there. But one day I did sit down and I Googled. I can't remember what I put in, but I came across the Selective Mutism research site. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, yeah, that's it. And it's that inability to speak in certain situations. At home, he's chatty, lively, and a completely different person to what he's like in public.
Early on, I would imagine that people would have gone down the, come on, you can do it. Just, has the cat got your tongue? All the usual, probably incredibly unhelpful things that, or maybe even teachers at school saying, it's your turn to answer the question. We're not moving on until you do. And then there's that big scrutiny, which I would imagine just completely compounds the anxiety, if it is anxiety that's behind this.
Definitely, yes, it is an anxiety disorder. And certainly the more pressure you put on, the worse it becomes. And you often end up with these great big empty spaces of quiet that feel awkward. One time when I was in school as a parent helper, the children were working in small groups, and the teacher had said to the year 2 children, which was Daniel, choose a year 1 and a year R to work with. And as we got round the circle closer to him, I could see his face went white and his bottom lip physically trembled, and I could see the fear in his eyes. And it was horrible to watch as a parent, but it proved to me at that point, that was a big turning point, and it proved to me that there was a real problem here. It wasn't just stubbornness. There really was anxiety there.
When did you, after you discovered selective mutism online and you had a look into that, when was it, or has it been officially diagnosed?
No, he's never had an official diagnosis. One reason was because I realised that would mean appointments with strangers, and I just thought, I can't put him through that. The school were happy for me to guide them with information from the Selective Mutism Research Centre, and together we helped him as best we could. We did have some external help at one point. We had the educational psychologist come in and see him at school. We had support from CAMS, the Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service, But at that point, nobody really knew what selective mutism was or how they could help. And I found that I was the one giving the information. So I thought, well, what's the point of having appointments that aren't actually helping? So, it was very much led by me with the support of his teachers.
So we've talked a little bit, Catherine, about how Daniel's selective mutism was dealt with at school. Did that get better over time? And when he went into secondary school, now at sixth form, how are things different?
Through primary school, it depended on the teachers. There was one particular teacher who was super with him, and he would talk to her. That was when he was probably about 8 or 9. And then other teachers, although they understood, they didn't quite manage to get to the point where he would talk to them. There were a few TAs that were really good with him, and he would open up to them. Secondary school, he saw it as a new start, and with the maturity of an 11-year-old, he was determined that he was going to have that fresh start. And we gradually got it so that he was answering the register for different teachers. We gradually built up one a day. And I think it was probably by the first Christmas he was there, he was answering the register for everybody. But it depended very much on the teachers and how they handled the situation, really.
How about his friends?
Yeah, he hasn't got anybody particularly close, but certainly peers within his year group that have known him for a long time have learnt how to communicate with him in a way that either he can answer with a nod or a shake or a simple yes, no. And quite often they'll watch out for him.
Well, that must mean a lot.
Yeah, he went on a 10-day residential trip almost a year ago to Germany and Poland visiting Second World War sites. And he told me he didn't speak a word in those 10 days, but the other youngsters and the teachers were there communicating with him in a way that he could communicate back.
Senior school can be a bit leery, and any kind of difference, generally through teenage years, any difference can be something that people pick up on and they can maybe focus on in a negative way. Were you worried about Daniel at school?
Very much, yes, particularly with going to secondary school where he'd meet children that he hadn't had at his primary school, coming on in from other feeder schools. And there were 1 or 2 incidents because they thought that he wouldn't tell anybody. He was quite easy pickings, really. But his tutor was brilliant, and she was always on the case before I even knew that there'd been a problem. And once or twice she'd rung me up at the end of the school day and said, there's been an incident, I've dealt with it, can you just check with Daniel that he's happy? And she was his tutor for 5 years and was excellent.
So what's he like at home?
Very argumentative with his sister. Usual sibling rivalry there. Full of ideas, always coming up with wacky ideas. And completely different from the public face that you see.
And how does that feel to you when you know that at home he's a certain way, when you go out he's a different way, and new opportunities come your way all the time, especially when you're 17. Crikey, the world's your oyster, isn't it? Yeah. Do you find that that you engineer situations so that to protect him at all? Yeah,
I think probably in the earlier days we tended to avoid certain situations because you knew it would be awkward. You knew that he wouldn't talk to other children if you were on a play date or something like that. And sometimes you do find that if you're faced with somebody who doesn't understand, you'll answer for him. Sometimes I think, perhaps I should have just waited a little bit longer, given him the chance. It's very difficult to get that balance of avoiding an awkward situation and giving him the chance to do it as well.
And I suppose being protective as well over somebody who is now a young man. Mm. Do you see him as that young man, or when he's struggling in a situation, do you still see him as that 7-year-old?
Yeah, it is awkward because people, he's probably 6'2", I think, by now. And people see him as a late teen, and if they ask him a question and they're confronted with silence, it's very awkward because it's not the norm, and people perhaps think he's being rude, he's being difficult, and so you immediately want to step in. But you don't want to say, well, this is his problem, every time in front of him, because that makes it very awkward for him. And he doesn't want a label, really. He just wants to be Daniel. And
what does he say to you about that kind of thing at home when he does open up? What does he say?
Not a lot. Sometimes he's more open than others, but certainly he doesn't like talking about it very much. I've tried over the years to get him to think things through in order to try and help himself, but he doesn't like analysing it. And sometimes if I've said we've come back from somewhere and he's chatted to somebody, I've said to him, "Oh, well done, that was really good," and he just doesn't want a fuss made. He just, yeah, OK, you've said it, let's move on now. And he knows that he's done well.
What's the future for Daniel?
He thinks or feels that with the move away from school, that he'll cope in a job situation. Certainly outside of school, we have seen him grow in confidence, which is lovely. And he's looking at the moment at possibly doing a higher level apprenticeship. He hasn't ruled out university, but it's not top priority. But possibly a high level apprenticeship. And he does say that hopefully in that job situation it's a completely fresh start and hasn't got the associations that education has had.
And so that we don't just focus on his selective mutism, what else is Daniel into? What's like the big thing in his life at the moment?
Well, he loves modelling, airfix kits. He does a lot of that. He helps. We are trustees, my husband and I, of a campsite over at Ringwood for youth groups, and he would spend most of his time over there helping. He drives the tractor for cutting the grass and pulling the trailer for bonfires, putting up tents in the summer, which is what John Cuthill came over and helped us with. So all sorts of things. Yeah, outdoors. He's very much an outdoors person.